Have you ever wanted to get inside the inner workings of high-profile criminal cases? True Crime and Human Design explores thrilling stories that reevaluate themes through an energetic lens. What new details and pockets of understanding might we see when we apply a human design filter to some of life's darkest corners? I'm your host, Corinna Rujo, and this is True Crime and Human Design. Hello, loves. My name is Corinne Rujo, and welcome to True Crime and Human Design. I want to start this podcast by allowing you to get to know me a little bit better, get to know my history, and really what brought me here. And on top of that, for any skeptics, any credentials that need to be brought to the forefront, I want to provide as well. I think it's really important that we understand education is not everything. However, I am very proud of my education. I'm very proud of my certifications. I'm very proud of my research and my professional career. The reason I'm so proud of that is because it's literally a physical manifestation of my soul. Before I dive in, obviously I have to share my human design. I am a 6/2 emotional manifesting generator. I have the left angle cross of uncertainty for my incarnation cross, which means that my conscious sun is in gate 8, my conscious earth is in 14, my unconscious sun is in gate 55, and my unconscious earth is 59. So 8, 14, 55, 59. My unconscious Mars, which in the gene keys is my core wound and zone of genius, is in gate 16.5. I'm motivated by desire for us never settling for less. And my perspective is power, which will make so much sense as I get going. I came into this world having this innate knowing, having this ability, and despite all of the conditioning, all of the factors, all of the lived experiences that really tried to disturb me and shake me off my path, I still managed to be right here and to really follow my soul's purpose, to follow my dharma, to live in alignment with who I am and my innate knowing. So I just want to do a little introduction. Since I was little, I've had this ability to see how power is distributed and innately know what's needed for others to feel safe and secure. I can remember little me, bright blonde hair, so blonde that it's white, just looking out into the world and being like, this doesn't need to be like this. Why are they doing this? Why are they approaching it like this? Obviously, this person is reacting this way because of this situation. I just always had an innate knowing. So I followed the yellow brick road. And that yellow brick road is what was really planned out for me. It's really what society told me. You have to go to college, you have to get that 4-year degree. And then after that 4-year degree, it's get your master's because you can do nothing with a 4-year degree, and so on and so forth. I followed the yellow brick road, but as I allowed myself to be distracted by the lights, glitter, and glam, I found myself back in school. I received my bachelor's in criminal justice with a background in social work. I went out into the field for a few years, and then I made a big move. And I took a little bit of time, a year and a half or so, away from the field, focused in on hospitality, which I had been in for 15 years, and allowed myself to take this time to really see where I wanted to go, to really understand the next steps that I needed to take. That is when I found myself back in school, getting my master's in forensic psychology. Here, I dove deeper into the psyche of offenders, victims, and systems of power. The little girl with this level of consciousness beyond what the world was resonating at was gaining my language to match my thoughts, ideas, beliefs, understandings, awareness, and visions. Was started over 14 years ago as specializing in special victims, has transformed into specializing into complex trauma. Because no matter what case I studied, researched, or what I worked with, everything circled back to the same thing: trauma, which is exactly what I came into this world seeing and knowing. I knew why people behave the way they do. I knew why people would respond certain ways. I saw those power dynamics, and I just knew what was needed for them to feel safe and secure. In addition to my master's in forensic psychology, I'm a 300-hour certified trauma center, trauma-sensitive yoga facilitator, and duly certified Dharma, soul purpose, and spiritual coach, which looks totally different than receiving a PsyD or PhD in forensic psychology. I'm also a business consultant, and I'm a human design translator. And translator might be confusing, but I refer to myself as a human design translator over a reader because that's what I do. I translate this complex system into a tool that you can use, into ways in which you can see that your flaws aren't your flaws. They're your beautiful gifts, but you're trapped in them being flaws. My path was never meant to be linear, if you can't tell by the way I go off topic, and by my array of certifications, my research, my professional, my education. I blend forensic psychology, neuroscience, and spirit to really have people understand this version of consciousness we're existing in, the ways that power dynamics not only operate within relationships, cycles of abuse perpetuate in systems of power, which give relationships, which give engagements, which give connections the ability, the capacity, and the support to engage in harmful behaviors. I ditched the plan and jumped into the unknown to face some of my most embedded trauma. In February of 2021, I was a clinician on a residential campus for youth who ultimately, we were their almost last stop shop for really not being pushed into the criminal justice system. Although they were very much intertwined with the criminal justice system, they were still looked at and as youth that had some trauma to the extent of which the court and the judicial system recognizes, which is bare minimum. I was a clinician, and mind you, this is during COVID. So everything just was magnetized that much more. So what people have to understand about kids in care and under custody of the state, kids that are in these residential placements, in these group homes who don't have permanency, their whole life has been a consequence. It's really been a punishment. And with COVID happening, they already have nothing. They don't have anything. They would come home from school or they would go to school on campus, and instead of being greeted by a caregiver or a sibling, they're greeted by staff. And people don't recognize that. These are your kids that, well, just put them up for adoption. Oh, foster care. These are the kids that, like, again, are being removed from their parents. It's not this, oh, I'm going to remove the kid and they're going to be so much better off. The system doesn't support kids or families in the way they should whatsoever. Off topic there, but in February of 2021, I had this huge epiphany. I had plans to go for my PsyD in forensic psychology so I could open my own practice, be a forensic psychologist, and work with high-profile criminal cases in determining competency. So high-profile criminal cases could or would have looked like repeated sexual offenders, serial rapists, serial killers, those types of cases. And I would determine whether or not they were competent at the time of the crime and whether or not they were competent to stand trial. In February of 2021, I had this huge epiphany, and it started like this. A little voice said, "How can you determine competency under the law when the law doesn't know what competency is?" And I was like, whoa. So that began the unravel. Come to find out, this was literally my Saturn return, like, boom, right there in February 2021. By October of 2021, I had gone through all of the motions, all the alternatives, all the thoughts, what I should do, how I should do it. And maybe I'll go for my PhD because I love research. And it was like, that's still not right, because I was still going to be stuck under a system that created harm. And no matter how much good I did, and I'm doing quotes for good, I still was feeding the perpetuating wheel, and I had to see that. And that humbled me real quick. It was a super emotional experience, and I had 48 to 72 hours of just this really low emotional wave, because I had to succumb to the realization of what my role has been in the field, and yeah, the ways it was still attributing to keeping these kids and keeping people in a system. Because again, what I've always known is that everything comes back to the same thing. It's trauma. So by the time I got to the high profile criminal cases, the harm had already been done. When I say complex trauma, again, it's really this umbrella term. It's knowing generational trauma, and I combine neuroscience to understand how the nervous system is passed down generationally. So at this point, nothing that we do is proactive. Everything that we do is reactive. And by the time you get to someone that's committed, or someone that is a serial killer and has committed these heinous acts, we're so unbelievably reactive. It's disgusting. I just couldn't do that. For a while with my bachelor's, it was like, do I want to work with offenders or do I want to work with victims? At this time, I really considered my specialties being with special victims. So that's sexual abuse, that's women, that's children. And I also specialize in sexual offenses and sex offenders. So I didn't know which one I wanted to do. And then I froze. And this is part of why I was accepted into this criminal justice major, was because I knew that at one point an offender had been a victim. So I was like, whoa, how do I mitigate this risk of harm? And again, being realistic and understanding the nervous system and that neuroscience aspect, combined with trauma, combined with these spiritual practices, with yoga, etc., everything we do is so reactive. By the time I got to those criminal cases, by the time I determined competency, too much time has been passed in between. There were so many times that we could have intervened and we failed. And because we failed to intervene when we should have, people were hurt, including the life that took those lives, the life that ripped people's souls out from them. In October of 2021, I ditched my plan and I jumped into some of the most unknown. I have done generations of healing in such a small increment of time, but I knew that something was still trapped in me, and the only way to face it was to leave my comfort behind. So I said goodbye to my 15 plans, and I allowed myself the time to see my creativity outside of this system, outside of corporate America, and allow me to see what I could do. That being said, when I quit, I also discovered human design. And when I tell you this was a game changer, I was learning about it through the Dharma Coaching Institute, and it was like a past knowing. I just knew it. This innate knowing just flew through me. At first, I actually didn't look into my design as much as I started looking into the people around me, my closest loved ones. And it was just so spot on. It was it was incredibly validating, and it put so much more language to really the levels of consciousness and why we're stuck, why our energy works a certain way. With forensic psychology, there are so many different theories. With clinical psych too, but not a lot of things discuss like the fact that we're so different. Like how our energy works is so different. My soul is so different than my wife's. It's so different than my brother's. What makes up that soul? It's not just nature. It's not just nurture. There's so much more to us than just us being surrounded by our parents or surrounded by caregivers or surrounded by this and that, and that's created this personality. Like we come out a whole ass personality, and what contributes to our energy. I've always been the person that cuts to the core. That's why I specialize in trauma, because I get to the bottom of things. Human design and the gene keys takes my intuitive abilities into another dimension. It's a literal energetic roadmap for me to further discern what will work and what doesn't. So I really tap into your divine design to open a portal. This portal is where I channel the ways in which power dynamics have fed off your beautifully diverse energy and stripped you of your autonomy. With people, I just knew. I'm not going to explain how I just knew, but then on top of it, with the education, with the tools, with the language, I was able to cut down even more. This clump of tools could work, this clump of tools could work, this approach could work, or this approach could work. And it was like trial and error based on the different tools we got down, but we still had to go through that little bit of trial and error. I want this shit to be effective. I want you to walk away with tools for immediate action. Because healing does not have to be a lifetime event. We can figure this out. And between forensic psychology, my innate intuitive knowings, this higher wisdom I hold, specializing in complex trauma, the different certifications, and human design, I'm able to just get to the bottom of it. I don't have to even do that little trial and error phase. Let's just cut to the core. Let's validate why that energy exists. Look at an area of yourself and you're like, genuinely, I don't know why this energy consumes me a little bit more. Nothing really showed up in my past to really require an additional need or a little extra support. It's just how I exist. It's how I intertwine. It's just how my energy works and interacts with the world around me. Those areas I can dive right into, and it makes so much sense. For me, what was such a game changer was I've had a lot of things happen throughout my lifetime in a really small amount of life, okay? I am 32 years old, and I feel like I've lived a lifetime. And I don't just feel like that to exaggerate. I've had a lot, but there was something about financial security which kept me running in the hamster wheel. And I knew why it existed. I knew why certain areas existed, but why was that one so much more prominent in leading my life and leading my trauma? Why did that trauma have so much more impact than my other traumas, it felt like? The traumas that I was able to move through with a lot more ease and grace. Why does this keep coming up? In my human design, it's because I require financial security. I actually am here to show the collective and show the world that being spiritual does not mean disengaging from the material world. I'm not one of those people that runs off to the mountains, ditches everything, and gets rid of it. For anyone that's into astrology, I'm a Taurus sun, like material. And I'm really here to show the world that we're here to play. We are spiritual beings living a very physical reality. We engage with this world, with this 3D world that we're walking on. let's fucking play with it. And there's nothing wrong with you striving for financial success. I am really here to show people that and lead us into an understanding of trauma, systems of power, the way they strip us of our identity, the way they cultivate these extremely harmful dynamics. And part of that is through this whole money wound, if you want to call it, through this competition, through people struggling financially. We deserve to fucking thrive. And thriving is not just thriving emotionally, mentally, or physically. It's financially too, because if you can't feel comfortable, if you don't feel secure, if you have experienced disruption or you feel like you don't know where your home is going to be, then you can't focus on anything else. Your basic needs aren't being met. So who fucking cares about connection? We need security. We deserve to thrive. And we need to understand that our time is our value, right? That's why we work. We're fucking valuable. All that being said, I created this podcast, one, because I just innately catch myself being like, ooh, wonder what their human design is, or going back over cases I've done, ooh, wonder what their human design is. Makes so much more sense why they require a little bit of this, why they were maybe more prone to this, why they needed maybe a little more self-assurance, why they maybe needed a little bit more self-love, why they maybe were more motivated towards this energy or this desire, so on and so forth. Honestly, it's hard for me to watch true crime anything because I'm so fucking sick of hearing people being like, we don't know why they did what they did. The fuck do you not know? And then they continue to explore their life and their past history. But it's like, but why did they act like that? And I'm like, it's all right there, you guys. You just explained it. So human design allows me to tap that much more into your energy of why rejection maybe cut you a little bit deeper than it cut me, and vice versa. Yeah, so I'm fucking sick of this narrative out there. It's only creating harm. Social media can be so valuable, but the lack of understanding around trauma is disgusting. And then you clump it together with people overutilizing therapeutic terms is so harmful. And I think it's really important that I say I love education. Again, you'll hear me mention my education, my qualifications, my certifications, so on and so forth. It's not because I think they're necessary. For me, again, it really reflects my soul's purpose. It pulled the things I already knew out of me that much more and gave me language to it. This is just a representation, a physical manifestation of the path I'm walking. But that being said, if you are not a specialist in a certain field, you need to stay the fuck in your lane. And humility is not practiced at all. When it's not practiced, it creates harm. And I have been witness to that. I have done more than enough research of that. I have had a lifetime of innate knowing and experiencing that. You don't go to your PCP for cardiology, right? So why are these people going to people that don't understand trauma? I don't specialize in autism. I don't specialize in anything on the spectrum for autism. It's not my area. Developmental delays, they are also not my area. If they're not attributed to a history of trauma, then again, that autism and that spectrum is not my specialty. I will proudly say that and pass it off to the person that does specialize in that. That is their gift. Please take it. I have enough to do. Not only that, but I respect you. I think it's awesome that we all have our own unique gifts and abilities, and we can always expand. However, harm happens through arrogance, and we're just perpetuating. So I wanted to cultivate a platform that held my credentials and also really cultivated safety and connection and compassion and allowed you guys to tap into these really complex topics and cultivate a greater understanding and hopefully have some people humble themselves. Again, I don't know everything. I don't want to know everything. I'm good in my areas though, and I know you're good in yours. There's also the social media where people are using specifically narcissism is being thrown around. You'll see this in documentaries. I've experienced it in the professional world, in my career, in my schooling, in all of the actually like educative documentaries and so on and so forth. There is such this almost like reflex to instantly go to diagnoses. By the time we get to a diagnosis, we have again failed at intervening. The DSM was actually created to fit a need, but right now it's extremely outdated. We need to focus on dysregulation rather than disorders and understanding the nervous system. Literally, I can understand the different ways in which you're showing these apparently diagnoses is like actually contributed to a lot of nervous system dysregulation. And what we've seen happen is slapping a diagnosis on someone, pumping them with meds, and not doing the actual fucking work, not facilitating them or supporting them for doing the work to improve their life and see themselves beyond this stigma, because a stigma is attached to it. Language is so important and stigmas exist. This whole language with narcissism especially is driving me fucking bonkers, because if you know anything about personality disorders, which hangs under me specializing in complex trauma, personality disorders have actually been one of the only recognized categories and subcategories in the DSM to stem from unresolved trauma, which I give credit to. However, they're met with this huge stigma, and people just throw around the language without knowing that it stems from unresolved trauma. There's antisocial personality disorder, there's narcissism, there's histrionic personality disorder, and there's borderline personality disorder. All of them come with maladaptive coping strategies created for survival. That's it. Something happened that shook them to their core. They had to learn how to survive. The attachments in their life was completely dysregulated and misattuned, which further shook that, or was the start cause. They had to adapt to their surroundings, and in order to adapt to their surroundings, they had to cultivate these coping strategies that kept them alive. So when we see personality disorders, and when you throw around narcissism, you're not helping. It's one thing to say narcissism and be actively seeking ways in which you can understand it better, in which you're dismantling the stigma, because there was a huge influx with borderline personality disorder. Is it challenging? Because it's trauma and people don't understand trauma, but the influx in research, again, has been significant, and people that do not understand this and how it feeds into diagnoses need to humble themselves, shut their mouths, and open their ears. You're not going to hear me say psychopath or sociopath either, because psychopath and sociopath are not actual diagnoses. And again, it's tossed around with no intervention, with no solution. It's tossed with a stigma, and until you've witnessed or been one of these people that have received one of these really weighted stigmas and really one of these weighted diagnoses, inappropriately, by the way, that's probably something I'll touch on, but I need to wrap this up. So many diagnoses are diagnosed inappropriately. There are so many teenagers who have been diagnosed with borderline, who have been referred to as borderline, who have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Rule of thumb, numero uno, for anyone that actually specializes in this and actually has done basic masters in this field, you do not diagnose an adolescent with those disorders. Absolutely fucking not. That's a literal rule of thumb, but it happens all the fucking time. I do want to add in that in case it hasn't been understood or clear, I will say it point blank. In no way is this platform used to glorify or glamorize any of the offenders whatsoever. The reality is they've caused extreme harm. There are not only their victims, but the victims' loved ones. There's their neighborhood, their community sphere, and the trauma they've put other people through their actions and through this consistent fear of someone's on the loose or we don't know or someone's dying. And there is that collective community trauma and that secondhand trauma that very much exists. I want to honor the victims in the best way. I can sit there and I can advocate and I can hold a candle for you and I can say a prayer and I can go out on the street or I can put a Facebook post or an Instagram post that says, honor the lives of so on and so forth, or be silent this day for so on and so forth. But that's not providing solutions. And from my experience, people need to be educated. They need to understand. We need to open a platform that talks about these complex topics so others can understand why these dynamics occur, so that we can get to know other people's energy, so you can get to know maybe your own human design as you reflect, as you go through these podcasts, as you go through these episodes, and see why energy is more prominent in certain areas for you. That being said, this is not to glorify them. This is to identify why things happen. I had a professor once tell me that he had barely looked in the eyes of evil, and he had been in the field for decades. He barely looked in the eyes of evil. And I see that. I know exactly what he means. I rarely look into the eyes of evil. What I see is unresolved trauma and systemic failures, ways in which we didn't intervene to allow a person to be in such survival mode, to be so primal that they committed awful acts of violence. This is not a platform to glorify. This is a platform to be fucking real, to hold compassionate space that is also filled with understanding and education, so that we can actually start to work on this whole harm reduction thing. So we start mitigating risks of harm, and hopefully you'll have epiphanies that will make you see that ways you've been told or stigmatized or flawed as negative aren't actually negative. They're just misunderstood. I hope to inspire people to see different paths, see different ways, take tools from this, and just be educated. Just be fucking educated. And again, really honor the victims by being a person who specializes in this area, that genuinely knows what they're talking about. And yeah, getting the information out there so that maybe another person, another victim, another loved one doesn't have to experience what these victims and their loved ones and their communities and this world had to. We're going to see how the system fails repeatedly, how the system fails through attachment theory, through trauma theory, through neuroscience, and through genetics, through human design, through the gene keys. We got to get real. We got to get honest, because the more we suppress the shit, the less we understand it and the more it runs. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, share the love with your friends, with your neighbors, with your coworkers, with your community, and head on over to my social media, my website. I'll leave the links in my bio, and let's just share. This is really about connecting and sharing awareness, because that's what intimacy is at its highest level of consciousness. Thank you so much. We'll chat soon.